brief pleasure to welcome on our behalf Mr. F.G. Prince, one of the most distinguished poets still writing in English. For 50 years he's plowed his own particular way through his time in his country. And we're very honoured to have him here, and I'm looking forward very much to hearing his poem. Thank you, Mr. Prince.
Well, I'm prepared to talk about my poetry or answer questions later on in the evening. I think we're going to have, first of all, one burst, at the end of which you might have some questions, and then a pause, break, and a second burst. I'm going to begin with something from the latest book, which is my latest book published last year, which you may have heard of, or you may not. It's called Later On, later on being later than the collected poems, which was published in 1979. I'm rather pleased with some of the writing in this last book. I'm going to read first the first poem in the book. I should warn you that I tend to write poems of some length. At least they count as of some length nowadays, though I think that if you really think of a poem as 300 or 300 lines as long, I think that's a mistake. I think of some of the really long poems in our language. But my poems have tended to be, in recent years, poems of that sort of length, and this one is roughly that length, though the lines are very short. And the actual number of words might be a better way of measuring it. Well, this poem is called the Yüan Chen Variations, and it is based upon translations of Chinese poems by Arthur Waley. I grew up with the translations of Arthur Waley. I think they are accepted as classical translations in their kind. They go on being printed, reprinted, and I chose to write about, base the sequence on poems by Po Chui, and to choose from Po Chui's poems referring to his lifelong friendship with a fellow poet called Yüan Chen, so that if anyone wants to do any research eventually on this poem, they can look at the Waley translations and find the originals of many of the passages in this poem. Po Chui, born in 772, died in 846, and his friend, roughly contemporary, died some years before he did. Now, some of the allusions in the poem will need some little bit of explanation. They were, of course, both of them poets. Both of them became members of the Mandarin class, and they did so because, as you probably know, ancient China invented the examination system, and everybody who had any literary talents was expected to try to pass the examination, which was based upon classical literature, and if they did so, they then became potentially members of the governing class, officials, used in any way that might crop up. So that their histories, their life histories, can only be understood as against that background. If you were one of these lucky or unlucky people who did well in the examination and therefore received a certain rank, you might or might not still be a success in your career. Your career would depend on all sorts of usual things, I suppose: corruption, string pulling, favoritism, changes of government, and so on. But one of the great features of their lives that followed from the system was that if you were successful as an official, you would be sent to some remote province. And if, of course, you were a failure, you'd also be sent to a remote province in banishment. So the Chinese classical poetry is full of poems of exile, absence, feelings of isolation. They looked back always to their youthful years in the capital when they were either preparing for an examination or immediately after they passed it as the golden period of their lives. And this friendship between these two poets began at that point. Now, the poem is in the form of a dramatic monologue spoken by Po Chui in old age, reminded by a dream of his dead friend. He thinks back, remembers the course of their early course of their friendship, and then their subsequent separations when one or other of them was banished into disgrace. The poem is called the Yuan Chen Variations because it is in a stanza of short lines, 6 lines in each stanza, in which the line lengths and the pattern of rhymes is varied consistently throughout. You have a little group of 3 stanzas or 2 in the same, strictly the same pattern, then you have another one with slight shifts, so the stanza keeps slightly changing, varying throughout, and at the same time, of course, something's going on in the story. 8 times the autumn weather has drenched with rain those grasses that wave green on your grave. What friends remain have grown old together. 3 times my own old bones have passed through illness. My hair is white. You, shut from light, lie in a stillness made of clay and stones. Do you know or not know if one can return to the world of men? Did you know when Han Lang came in turn to the springs below? You came last night, or so I dreamed. The sweetness like a cloud drifted, flickered and shifted, yet to meet you seemed quite easy and right. I had seen the faces first of old friends, but then younger in a band rode through the tilled land where Chang'an ends to bare spring places. Yuan Chen's gate, yes, good we agreed to call. Almond and peach had starred the western courtyard, half ready to fall, half inclined to wait. You were more mine than any, that I knew, and you smiled to see me come and pointed to some blossom within view, then opened wide. You seemed to say neither of us had changed, or could change, or be estranged, though years wore away for which absence was foretold, and we had not grown old. We would still ride or walk when the snows melt, forgetting cap and belt, or side by side sit, talking and drinking on, and rhyming until dawn. It should not be rare, you said, for me to call. When I woke, I could not doubt you were still there. Put my hand out, there was nothing at all. Wise men maintain we are dream-ridden in this fleeting world, which is no more kind to our love and pain than to mere blind self-serving and competing. To be wise with them as eggs hatch and birds take wing like summer and our life, we should contemn desire and strife. And when you went to Changling, leagues away, I thus had reasoned with my will, but quite in vain. One wish for us at times to meet again, I could never kill. And now when my old body and soul were best to be numb and sleep, the thought of you, Wai Chi, is enough to keep them both from rest. I hear my servant say, Master, rise from bed, but it is cold today, sir, stay at home. He leaves me the bowl and comb when I turn my head. My pillow has a tear stain. Shut in all day, I think with this old pain, and stare in the bowl, that some strange joy of soul shines through my dismay. Well, that's the first section. I should perhaps point out that these people all had familiar names as well as their official names. So Wai Chi is the familiar name of Yuan Chen. Well, then the second section, Po Chui goes on thinking about the past and remembers the beginnings of their friendship, and the section then ends with the first period of exile in which Yuan Chen is in disgrace and sent away. I think of waking in the country inn, knowing that we would meet. Swallows were making high up a sweet, faint, crazy din. Lying quite still, one hand above my eyes, the palm turned up, I felt myself fill like a wine cup with our new love. I thought of meeting, 2 days to wait, then the city, red towers, your smile and greeting. We would talk for hours, drink and sit late. The bare room and ceiling were already light. Bird clear skies spread wide and bright. How calm the feeling, so one can live and die. Calm, so happiness and sadness mix here, so make all things clear, so like an elixir change our awareness. Yes, I can see it here. Wash till the ink ran what the dull world taught. Too many clever young men had sought fortune in Chang'an and might miss it forever. We had to forget, ride in early May to an old temple, say, with others of our set, and watch the moon rise, drink, philosophize, laugh, and disdain things beyond redress. High debts and low business, court envies, could not stain what for us was sure, careless and pure, like the oriole I would hear sing, brush in hand, labouring, twilight a dying coal, one last clear remark from the royal park. A cheerless kingdom lay spread for our latter days, plains, mountain chains, high roads, riverways. Bored by the rough and ill-bred, we should take pains and must face as commonplace that we would lose friends, all that mattered. No one could choose when failure and good grace equally scattered. Yet our short time was cut. You were insolent, they said, and should be sent to cool in Lantine. Make yourself useful, but off there, unseen. After you left, a few tears. Then when you were day by day further away, I dreamt one night you came, sad and in fears that you could not write. A knocking woke me, doom, doom, and there came a letter in your name. There you were, thinking and writing, the mountain moon of Yangcheng sinking. You wrote by candlelight, an exile's heartaches, worst that the road he takes lacks friends, and 10 verses with moon, flower, midnight, said it again. 10 lines to me like gold. My heart leapt and mounted. Looking for less, I was the more consoled, and would not guess at more than could be counted. Worse came than some years to wait, when in my turn I would go and you stay. That first time we thought so late would look far away, another world, other sky. Well, in the third section, he goes on thinking about certain specific moments in the past. So the center of this, the basis of this section really is that he remembers an occasion that gradually comes back to him when he was going into exile himself, and he was on the journey, and he was on board ship, and he happened to read or take out from his baggage Yuan Chen's book of poems and read it in that situation. But it begins with the thought of Yuan Chen being dead. His old fame is done, and from his brush no new songs will come. In a dead hush his poems on silk must be collecting dust. But I heard one day, not listening, not too far away, a woman sing some lines, stave or two, seemed I knew. Trying to know, I felt my heart sting from the cut or blow, saw, knew the thing, his phrase and line, the look, even, of his book. And I see myself see that. No moment with him, no glimpse of his face, but myself looking at his book in a dimly lit, narrow space, on board ship, held up by gales for weeks at Chuku. I thought bitterly, everything I do fails, reaching exile too can be beyond me. Wind, rain, wind for weeks, the landing reeks. Tired late at night, I put off bed and look by candlelight and find Yüan's book. I undo the twine and read every line, the candle gutters. I sit by its last rays, softly it sputters, vacantly I gaze. Night is far from dawn, but I sit on and listen with eyes half closed to waves that now strike as the winds rise, harder on the prow. Well, then in the last section we come back to, as it were, to the present and Ho himself in old age. I can be more solitary now with no ties, have no need to marry or give in marriage, and need not prize those duties or disparage. My temptation increases to lie late in bed, small nephews and nieces all flown, having grown. Even morning red sours to one left alone. Yet sound above, beneath, I have green old age, still have eyes and teeth, still strength and will to see, and play the sage through strange wild scenery. Now to be sure I can set off no longer with but a manservant and my stick and rap, but must take a stronger companion against mishap. But then I can wander alone for an hour and find, like this, a grey cove where the waves hiss, and a thin tattered bower of tree roots where I may ponder. Waves glint and tap. Thinking here you could never have been, I pause, and have been seen by a dipper with blue wings who gives up his nap. Oh, why, Chi, how many as lone rivers and mountain shelves without you have I known, and could not see and not think of our two selves. Sunset in bright curves and petal shapes of flame towered up the sky, hushing the mountain apes and valley birds on Lushan while I sat by. From my thatched hut I looked down the west, where it sank back and ached to be unblessed, wingless and shut from the vast flaming track. I might gaze today on that rare fiery way, but with you not there, not long to ride the air. Where there is no Yüan, why should I go? Where there is no more striving to have and know, one sees no way there, but burning peace laid bare. I saw that today, Polo Tien can say. Well, that's that. I think that I will read now from some extracts from another really longer poem, published in 1975, in free verse this time, called The Drypoints of the Hasidim. Now, like the last poem, I'm afraid this goes off to strange regions for its material. This is a poem about the life, or rather a religious mystical movement beginning in the 18th century among the Jews of Eastern Europe, the Jews who lived in Poland, the Ukraine, and Russia in that period. The Hasidic movement, of course, is recognized nowadays to be one of the most remarkable religious revivals in Judaism for centuries. Its origins are mysterious, I can't go into them here, but it basically was a movement among very common, ordinary people trying to provide a kind of devotional life, devotional experiences for the kind of humble people who, on the whole, were living not completely orthodox Jewish life. They couldn't fulfill perhaps all the requirements of the law. At any rate, that's a possible reason for this movement, which is a kind of liberation from traditional restraints to some extent, and religion above all are a kind of mystical joy. I should say also, I think it's worth, I hope you don't mind I'm saying these things in an introduction to introduce a poem, but it does take a little bit of information to, before I think you can take some of it in. A thing that is fascinating about this material is that it was unknown outside those communities in that area practically until modern times. The movement beginning in the 18th century, middle of the 18th century, reached a climax, at least this is a matter of opinion, but I think reached a climax in about 1800 and then began to go into a sort of decline, lost its fervour, became more hardened in religious observances, and it's paradoxical that nowadays there are still Hasidic communities of Jews living in Brooklyn, in New York, and of course there are some in Israel, who represent the most rigid kind of orthodoxy, which is really the last thing that they represented when they began. When they began, they were, as I say, it was small groups of people with some kind of inspiration or religion. Well, one of the fascinations of the theme, for me, perhaps the thing that may not come through, is the idea that something could be buried, completely unknown, for so long, and then suddenly emerge. It was buried because, first of all the material, all the basis of our knowledge of these people was oral traditional stories, sayings, handed down from one generation to another, finally written down in Yiddish, and then, of course, finally in our century, translated sometimes to German, but mostly into English. So it's an extraordinary case of something which is dead by the time it came to be really known in the West. And of course, we have to bear in mind the terrible ending to the ending to the whole history, with the destruction of those communities, and first of all, their gradual thinning out, because so many of those people migrated to America in the late 19th century. Finally, of course, the absolute destruction of the Second World War. Well, then we have this pattern of the founder, a humble man, preaching a new doctrine and gathering followers. Then we have a succession of similar figures who are called Zaddiks. The teachers, the leaders are Zaddiks. The followers are Hasids or Hasidim. And I'll read the central section, or perhaps the last section too. The central section comes down to reproducing in a string a number of these anecdotes which have to represent hundreds, if not thousands, of the same kind. But they are telling stories of kings and sons of kings, of hidden just men who could be messiahs had they not put away the thought, rays, glimpses in shadow, and that sweetness, love, justice, sonship, brotherhood, which makes the longing of the world. Messiah, son of Joseph, who could be anywhere, a youth half grown, born anywhere in Hungary or Poland, perhaps the boy of 17 who had undoubtedly been seen in Buddha with threadbare coat and face of an amazing star-like purity. And debts and wages, prophecies and wonders, witty constructions on the famous crux, jokes and ingenious repartees and guesses, and how one said some deep thought, much like a dictum of his own but cited as another man's, he had it from the Babylonian Talmud, but I had it from where the Talmud had it. And so they tell and tell again this or that well-known story of the Zaddik alone in birch woods in the summer evening, or at the third meal on the Sabbath like a rope let down one day a week from heaven. Jacob Joseph of Polnoy, they tell us, had a very restless face. Issachar Ber or Beryl, as a young man, was so poor he had not eaten for some days. Now in those days the bath at Radoshitz was 60 or 70 steps below ground level. Issachar Ber undressed down to his shirt and took a light and started on his way. Follows a tale of evil powers calling through darkness, clapping hands on water, brushing his cheeks with dirty wings, but baffled in the end. And other stories of strange powers. Drives in the country, villages at dawn, dull pools in early light. And how the Baal Shem, driving with some friends at night, dozed off, and suddenly a wood sprang up and blocked the road. They woke him, and the wood drew back in darkness. But a voice said softly, gruffly, "You should take more care." Perhaps I should have explained that the Baal Shem is the name for the founder, the original, quite extraordinary religious thinker who started it. And Moshe of Sambor, Zevi Hirsch's brother, as a boy went trading in the villages, and once he asked his brother and his teacher why, when he came back at the end of day for the afternoon prayer and began to pray, he felt a glory flooding his whole body. And Zevi Hirsch had said, why be surprised when a traveller walks in the ways of God, through fields and byways, whether he knows or not? The divine sparks in the trees and plants and stones are drawn forth to attach themselves and shine in him. And Isaac, it is written, went out in the field to meditate at evening. And the Yehudi told a visitor at Parsisha, Kalman of Krakow, that he had among his pupils one in whose face could be seen the full image of God. And Kalman went round with a light, shielding it with his hand, when the disciples were asleep, looking at each in turn, holding his breath, until he found behind the stove, faint stir of embers in the stove, the young man Shalom Olayim, and Kalman, looking, half nodding, had agreed, yes, it is true. Blessing the new moon in the month he died, the rabbi of Berdichev had preached at supper on the upright man and death. Then he said grace and walked about the room, and his face glowed, and he stood beside the table and said, "Good table, you are and can be witness. I have eaten and talked rightly at your board. So I shall have you made into my coffin." Chaim of Zantz, who liked to talk to market people, would tell of one who said, "Good sir, I have got nothing out of life. I spend my time, day after day, jogging and shuttling to and fro from Anipol to Brod, and climbing in and out of carts, and being thought a cheat. And what is this when one considers how beyond boredom and disgust, how sweet it is to be able to know and say, I can enter any night or day myself in my nakedness before the Holy One, to bathe in God, to pray." Well, the next movement is trying to deal with the gradual decline of the movement. I think perhaps I ought to read one or two paragraphs from this. The same grey path covered with last year's leaves. And the light of day shines down, the world goes on, and their enemies are not now the Mitnagadim, learned and orthodox, but rather Germans, so-called enlightened ones. In other words, the faithless of another generation who have done better for themselves and mock at poverty and dirt among the Poles, quoting from Scripture, "The wise man will not wear a spotted robe." And no doubt there must be two minds, two dispositions, like the two friends, boys, dear companions, one of whom will say it is so, the other no, not so. But the real ending is not like that story, which is of love and faith come back from death. For there are others who will come close and say, like some from Lubavitch, "I have a secret." And the secret is there is no secret, nothing. No true belief, no ecstasy, no way, nothing. And those who know it but pretend, put on a face for reasons that are more or less unbeautiful. And so they travel through the ways of all such pious companies and spread irresistibly and sink, undo what they had come to do. As they had gone out to the people had come in, eager to catch the crown of the anointed, the surging of angels and the figures of old men, Elijah, Abraham, and the trembling of the worlds, but lost the way, because they cannot quite believe there is a way. So, Yüan, one of these later masters, Yüan, tired, half sick of reading Kviklach, so called the little notes on slips of paper a Zadik would be given for his prayers, small grubby problems and petitions so abject, Yüan gave his friends a parable of a king's son, as usual, who had run away from home. And after years his father sent a messenger to find him and be reconciled and promise anything he could think of as a gift, his dearest wish. And the man had found him dressed in rags with bare feet, dancing among the peasants, gave his message, and the young man went and said he would be happy if his father were to send a pair of shoes. Then we have another section on the next paragraph on one of the brilliant teachers who lapsed from the faith. And Menahem Mendel said, "I hoped to draw a few serious companions and with them become a flame, but I drew multitudes who turned me into water. And as a young man looking for a teacher, he said, I want a simple Jew, a plain Jew who fears God." But the rabbi of Lublin had replied, "Your way is the way of melancholy. Leave it. It has not found favour in my eyes." And Mendel left him for Parsisha, for the Yehudi, and then for Kotsk, arriving after years of such fame as he detested, and worn, tormented by his fears, fetching up in that Friday night at Kotsk, when the disciples were assembled, and he burst out on them in a rage, blaspheming, hitting at books and candelabra. "Idiots, there is no judgment and no judge. I am no rabbi nor a rabbi's son." And after that, for nearly 20 years, he never left his room or spoke, but now and then stood at the door with loathing in his eyes. And even as a boy, he was black, Mendel, and the Yehudi, when a visitor inquired if any of his pupils were worthwhile, considered and said, "Mendel wants to be worthwhile." Well, then we have the last quite short section, which looks back on the whole thing. Reading their story, I follow and agree with everything that happens. Some for Napoleon and Prussia, some for the victory of Russia, with prayers on either side. wars, revolutions, and new liberties, old and new sorrows and indignities, and ugly ones may be redeemed, but ugliness rises, rises again. And everything had changed, all the conditions, more than 100 years ago, and well before the old world had begun to go. What traces would you find today in Stakau or Lizensk or Chernobyl but cemeteries and their leaning stones, with carvings of two hands, finger on thumb? But look back further, and you see it is the same faith, the same pain in those brethren of the spotted robe, the same in us, the same in them, dying and yet surviving, contending always to survive. Their holy men crying, if not now, when? Why does the son of Jesse yet delay? Their only way through all that hating and despising, the soldier weeping on his iron bed, to endure and be silent, reason, rejoice and pray, die if you must. And even Israel of Ritzin, the great-grandson of the Maggid, dressed in silk, white silk, and sitting in a golden chair, could say, I have heard the blowing of the horn, but not in this world. Anyway, it's time to break, or I think that would be enough for first. I'm asking.
That's a short one.
A short one, thank you. Short ones are not so easy to come by, but there are some, no doubt, earlier on. And I think, of course, that the long years of trying to write short poems were perhaps mistaken. I think my real bent has proved to be for the longer poem. Well, here's a very short poem based on a very famous story by Hans Andersen. The poem is called Autumn Journey. I saw from the gliding train a yellow birch, and the woods below, and the dark pines close in again, and thought of dry leaves falling slow under the cold cloud shadows, horses of shadow loosed in dreams, and of the slow queen, pale and fair, Gerda looking for her Kay, poor Gerda, when she met the crow who led her in by the back way. So as they climbed the castle stair to reach the bedroom where he lay, dark horses plunged like shadows, long-legged on the wall, in dreams, and Gerda, while her heart beat fast, came where he slept, half turned away, and called him, and the dreams rushed past, and he awoke, who was not Kay. Well, I'm not quite sure where to go from here. Another short one, which is about an object I saw at Bewley in the New Forest, which is a heart coffin, as you see the poem will say. At Bewley, this is called. Tall oaks are speckled yellow at the edges by that grey wreck de bello loco regis. And there on view is what they call a heart coffin for two, crumbled away in part. Two cells or cavities in a stone block are as for hearts these cut to interlock, and still ensconce one green glazed broken cup, where a heart once had been closed and laid up. Well, perhaps there would be some questions, or one question or two now, and then I can go on something else later. Or perhaps we'll just have a break now. I don't know. Any questions? I really have been writing poetry for 50 years. I have, in fact. I suppose there might be some questions about that.
I wanted to ask you one question. It's become increasingly evident ever since you wrote the Drypoints, the Hasidim,
basically, yes.
And poetry, well, obviously you're referring to a lot of poems. The one about Rupert Brooke is meditation on Christopher Hassel's biography, the poet. Next one was about Stella and
Liza, yes.
nice words were used in the book there. Obviously, before that, you were going back into the past. You were very fascinated by the past. But you seem more and more to approach the past through books and through choice of books rather than trying to reimagine the past. Is this a progression that has been forced upon you?
How can you reimagine the past except through books? One question to ask you.
In Stratford, for instance, you went back to art, amongst other things.
Well, I mean, I used a portrait by Van Dyck, yes, but I mean that is almost equally, well, it's not a book, but it's a document, isn't it?
But also you tried more to enter into his mind without forcing the historical documents on us so much. So it struck me that we were trying to do grounding, which you're not doing in the way as well. Except perhaps in that book you which struck me as quite interesting.
Well, of course, I could go on about this, but now I'm quite sure that, make one point, that having spent one's life as a scholar, though of course I have taught and studied modern literature as well as older literature, your mind begins to work and your imagination necessarily feeds on things that you find written down in books or printed. I mean, what I said about the stories of the Hasidim, in a sense, the thrill that I get out of rediscovering or resurrecting the past is a kind of, perhaps it's peculiar to my experience as a scholar, but I mean, if that is your experience, if that has been your life, what are you to do about it? I mean, I'm not quite sure whether you are, in fact, suggesting a sort of, well, not an objection, but some kind of, feeling that I shouldn't be doing this. I mean, I so often have been told, I mean, you haven't necessarily said so, but that it's a wrong tack, that one's imagination shouldn't feed on books or on one.
I'm aware there was this feeling. I wanted to know your feelings about it.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that once you begin to argue about it, you say everything is the past, including our present. I mean, everything we're saying now, what happened yesterday is the past. I mean, modern literature is the past as much almost as the remoter past. I mean, everything we know, thought itself, looks back to the past all the time.
I find the lot of those very, very indeed, covering all every aspect of conceivable life. I mean, in other words, past is always with us, in every way. Like one's writing about Louis' experience in 18th century in Central Europe. I mean, I know that has very little relevance to the last 20th century England, but perhaps it may inspire us to feel the possibility of such things happening in our midst. The obsession.
But the only interest I'm looking for, the only interest I ever find, the only thing that ever can make me write a poem is something which is going on in me now, which chimes with something which I can see there, which means I can project anything I have in my own experience, using these facts or stories to dramatize it. And this is the only way that one can get it out of oneself. And if one looks inward and focuses on one's own immediate emotions or recent emotions and experiences, and my experience is that it all begins to crumble. You can't make anything of it.
That is the lyric, though, isn't it?
What?
I mean, that is only the lyric can do that.
Yes, or the lyric, I suppose, can to a point do that. But even the lyric is dramatization, isn't it? I mean, lyric always has been dramatization.
So what was it that was particularly dragging you on to do the Rupert Brooke thing, which I found interesting because you weren't talking about the idealised version of Brooke, but in fact Brooke's sense of the rottenness of his times and how he was, as it were, at one with his times. This was an interesting point, vein to mine. Now, what was it in you that was driving you?
Well, I mean, I think that, again, I've discovered, without having realized it until more or less recent years, that I have a particular feeling for that generation, that feeling, that period. Now, my parents belonged up into that period, just the pre-1914 and the 1914 experience. And I never, on the other hand, had responded to Rupert Brooke as a poet very much, and not as a personality either. I mean, I grew up in a period when he was completely out of fashion and spurned and sneered at in the 1920s and 30s. And still don't have a very high opinion on his poetry and the texture of it and so on. But then I read this book, which came out in the 60s, and found it infinitely more interesting than I had ever expected it to be. I mean, another case, if you like, of something which takes 40 years to come out, or 50 years to come out, because his dear old mother would never allow anything to be written which was really, because it is part, it's essentially a kind of prelude to anything that comes after. And I should say something about the poem before I read it. It's written as a dramatic monologue in the person of a Renaissance architect, and addressing a letter to a patron, persuading him or telling him of what he can do. It was suggested, in fact, by a document we have, which is the draft of a letter by Leonardo da Vinci, to be found in a notebook, addressed to the ruler of Milan, telling him all that he could do, offering his services. It's interesting, if you look at that letter, to see that Leonardo tells mostly of his ability to create military machines and so things of that sort. Doesn't refer very much to his painting. Simply says in a throwaway manner, in painting I can do as much as anybody else. And the point is, this poem of mine is suggested by that letter, and at the same time it is a young man's poem, both for good and for bad. In other words, it's a little bit ostentatious, showing off, a little bit over-sophisticated, and trying to be too clever. And at the same time, it has, I think, got a genuine feeling of the sort of uncertainty of youth and the lack of a balanced feeling about one's abilities. How will I read it? An epistle to a patron. My lord, hearing lately of your opulence in promises, and your house busy with parasites, your hands full of favours, your statutes admirable as music, and no fear of your arms not prospering, I have considered how to serve you and breed from my talents these few secrets which I shall make plain to your intelligent glory. You should understand that I have plotted, being in command of all the ordinary engines of defence and offence, 115 buildings, others less complete. Complete, some are courts of serene stone, some the civil structures of a warlike elegance as bridges, sewers, aqueducts, and citadels of brick, to which I declare the fact that your nature is to vanquish. For these I have acquired a knowledge of the habits of numbers, and of various tempers, and skill in setting firm sets of pure bare members which will rise, hanging together like an argument with beams, ties, and sistering pilasters. Lintels and windows with mouldings as round as a girl's chin, thresholds to libraries, halls that cannot be entered without a sensation as of myrrh, by your vermilion officers, your sages and dancers. There will be chambers like the recovery of a sick man, your closet waiting not less suitably shadowed than the heart, and the coffers of a ceiling to reflect your diplomatic taciturnities. You may commission hospitals, huge granaries that will smile to bear your filial plunders, and stables washed with a silver lime, in whose middle tower seated in a slight acridity, you may watch the copper thunder kept in the sulky flanks of your horse, a rolling field of necks glad to be groomed, the strong crupper, the edged hoof, and the long back seductive and rebellious to saddles, and barracks, fortresses, in need of no vest save light, light that to me is breath, food and drink. I live by effects of light, I live to catch it, to break it, as an orator plays off against each other and his theme, his casual gems, and so with light, twisted in strings, plucked, crossed or knotted or crumbled, as it may be allowed to be by leaves, or clanged back by lakes and rocks, or otherwise beaten, or else spilt and spread like a feast of honey, dripping through delightful voids and creeping along long fractures, brimming carved canals, bowls, and lacrimatories with pearls. All this the work of now advancing, now withdrawing faces, whose use I know. I know what slabs thus will be soaked to a thumb's depth by the sun, and where to rob them, what colour stifles your intact quarries, what sand silted in your river gorges will well mix with the dust of flint. I know what wood to cut by what moon in what weather, of your sea winds, your hill wind. Therefore, tyrant, let me learn your highways, ways of sandstone, roads of the oak leaf, and your seaways. Send me to dig dry graves, exposing what you want. I must attend your orgies and debates, let others apply for austerities. Admit me to your witty table, stuff me with urban levities, feed me, bind me to a prudish luxury, free me thus, and with a workshop from my household, consisting of a pregnant wife, one female and one boy child, and an elder bastard with other properties. These let me regard, let me neglect, and let what I begin be finished. Save me, noble sir, from the agony of starved and privy explorations, such as those I stumble from a hot bed to make, to follow lines to which the night sky holds only faint contingencies. These flights with no end but failure, and failure not to end them, these palliate or prevent. I wish for liberty, let me then be tied, and seeing too much, I aspire to be constrained by your emblems of birth and triumph, and between the obligations of your future and the checks of actual state, to flourish, adapt the stubs of an interminable descent, and place the crested key to confident vaults, with a placid flurry of petals and bosom and lips, or stony functionaries support the persuasion so beyond proof of your power. I will record in peculiar scrolls your alien alliances, fit an apartment for your eastern hostage, extol in basalt your father, praise with white festoons the goddess, your lady. For your death, which will be mine, prepare an encasement as if of solid blood. And so let me forget, let me remember that this is stone, stick, metal, trash, which I will pile and hack. My hands will stain and bend, none better knowing how to gain from the slow pains of a marble, bruised, breathing strange climates. Being pressed as I am, being broken by wealth and poverty, torn between strength and weakness, take me, choose to relieve me, to receive of me. Must you not agree, as you have been to some, a great giver of banquets, of respite from swords, who shook out figured cloths, who rained coin, a donor of laurel and of grapes, a font of profuse intoxicants, and so to be so too for me. And none too soon, since the panting mind, rather than barren, will be prostitute, and once I served a herd of merchants. But since I will be faithful, and my virtue is such, though far from home, let what is yours be mine, and this be a match, as many have been proved, enduring exiles and blazed, not without issue in returning shows. Your miserly freaks, your envies, racks and poisons, not out of mind, although not told, since often born. Indeed, how should it be that you employed them less than we? But now be flattered a little to indulge the extravagant gist of this communication, for my pride puts all in doubt. At present I have no patience I simply hope, and I submit me to your judgment, which will be just. I'm not quite sure what to do next. What to do next? Thinking, somebody suggested something from the memoirs in Oxford. Well, the memoirs in Oxford were written when I went to Oxford for a year off in 1968, 69, and suddenly I saw this poem, which includes in the second part some retrospect about my growing up in South Africa and my parents. So I read some of that. Part 2. Somewhere in Moriac, a girl sees the young man, the so recurring young man in Moriac, as preserved, that's to say, untouched, reserved, and wonders to herself, demurring, for what? All things are preparations, our birth and parentage, when, where, in the ups and downs of foreign nations, sunsets and pets and railway stations, the nursery freeze, an old Scotch air. And English and French novelists once dwelt on home as preparation to a good plain love. If asked for what, they might have said at least, why not, to live again in our narration. It was a wide blue British sky that arched above deep seas in foam, where ships in glossy paint went by to India, China and Shanghai, and back to England, back to home. And liners and hotels had punch and ideal homes, the Tatler Sphere and the Illustrated London News, cartoons by H.M. Bateman, views from the Matopos to Kashmir. That world was ours, no matter where. So brave and staid it stretched away through the unthinking pastimes of colonial England, bridge and golf, tea parties, tea 4 times a day, Saturday racing drives on Sunday. Yet through those acres of dry thorn and sun and dust and boulders ran not quite a ghost, a thought of man and God and law, not quite outworn. Trophies and scars of faded walls, a hillside grave seen from the train, an empty blockhouse by the bridge, and granite needle on the ridge might tell of greed and pride and pain. And the other further war, of course we won, was worse, incomprehensible. But surely reason must increase, and what was left of hatred cease. That would be only sensible. My father, from the time I claim remembrance, on his mantel shelf had standing always in the same silver and dark blue velvet frame, a small old photograph of himself at 20, at his most beautiful, long-jacketed, pale-faced, dark-eyed, like a young moon that nears the full, his head gazes on a twilight pool, his head was tilted to one side. My mother blamed his education for faults and lessons never learned, his puns and self-depreciation, wrong choice of friends and speculation, gambling with money so well earned. I had adored, then hatefully rejected him in an immense hard rage and boyish misery, yet now in all he was I see a strange and saving innocence. I grieve that we were never friends. It hurts, but neither would know how. What that I say can make amends, I leave it, knowing how it ends, and love him as I see him now. For now he is beyond our reach. I share and understand too well. Let his love of music teach me like a touch, not needing speech, things he could never tell. And I must thank my mother's mind, a fiery rational sense of right, love of all things well designed, books, furniture and people, signed with logic, courage, wit and light. She gave us pictures and adventures, ballads and stories by the fire, echoes of Ruskin and Carlyle, the notion that there could be style, but most herself and her desire. She was Jane Eyre and Maggie Tulliver, those ardent women, only free after such hardships, childhood scrapes, young visions, efforts and escapes, as in the mind's eye we could see. And we were Oliver and Jim Hawkins and David Copperfield and Absalom with gold hair in the Bible and young Benjamin and Jairus' daughter that was healed. I owe her my delight. Sorry. Must have a sip of water. She had wished that she could believe. Said once the basis of our lives is wrong, and once that she could feel something mysterious, an appeal that opens like a flower, revives. For he died early, she lived on, through all the latter part of life, bitter, but gradually less, chafing yet not comfortless, but now the thought is like a knife, that they could have such confidence and win so far, but be defeated. Nothing be left of it at length, their hope, young arrogance and strength, their work undone or uncompleted. But childhood, music in the summer garden, and the first fire lit on a cold sunny afternoon, apricot blossom, bees in tune, butterflies that alight and sit and sun themselves and wag their wings. Our moderate greatness went awry, but not before we had these things fenced with their love. And if it rings the memory that all went by, yet they were lucky all the same, both he and she, and those who live have far more to regret or blame. We only took that they can claim they taught the way to give. This is quite a long poem. I don't think I shall read any other part of it, or perhaps I could. I read the last section, or it's called epilogue, in which Shelley comes to mind, and I say a little bit about Shelley. I was writing this poem in Oxford, in fact, in All Souls College, which is on the other side of the high street from University College, where Shelley was for his brief period at Oxford and was sent down, expelled, and University College has, of course, the Shelley Memorial, late Victorian, rather glamorized memorial of Shelley, the drowned Shelley. I might do better to end here, put down the pen and close my eyes, but only to be free I'll add one other memory I had that nothing else will exorcise. I'll call up Shelley, give him thanks and praise, tell him in gratitude how at about 13 I won some books at school, his book was one, and how it wrapped my solitude. That book begot a dream in me, to wander out alone and bare and be a naked man and free, and yet one would not want to be alone, another should be there. But opening to the wilderness of light, air, music, in the sun, we fuse with all and not repress love, joy and goodness that could bless the universe and make it one. Be drunk with dew and winds that blow, sand dunes and budding thorns, and hope, a sweetness like the form and glow of human limbs, the body so alive and quivering to have scope. You lie nearby, carved as if found, washed up in nakedness, dead white and lax, yet not released but bound in marble, more deeply drowned by that almost subaqueous light. So at last, broken, there you lie. No, but you breathe and burn and shine, and from the breaking wave and dying flame and the withered leaf and flying cloud on the barren Apennine, The rays go out, grow out, shine here, everywhere. And who knows what share you had in this, my coming here and my desire and hope and fear and all that came of it elsewhere. It is all like a damp, stained book, England, an old biography, layer on layer where we look dismayed at what those people took for life, supposing it to be their melancholy public labours, not Shelley's verse that spurns the crowd, breaks from the wreck of empires, wars, rebellions, and flings wide the doors to dappled moonlight, burning cloud. I catch at visions, worlds in brief, that point to the unchangeable, as if I could insert a leaf illumined in the same belief in art and thought and living will. Would be like a hymn, a creed. Yet I began with no such aim, but looked for meaning in the past, youth and frustration, and at last, this was the way it came. I think that I will now read a poem from the latest book, which, well, I'm not quite sure how to, what to expect in your reactions. This is a poem about a dog. Not about a dog so much as by a dog, trying to create the consciousness of a dog and at the same time attach it to a story. Story being a medieval story of a saint called Saint Roch and his legend. Just to tell you briefly the story of Saint Roch, who was a very popular saint in the 14th and 15th centuries, and was popular probably because he was patron and protector against the plague, which was very prevalent in Europe in those centuries. And he's probably an unhistorical character. Stories, the legends about him are certainly very quaint, to say the least. He set out as a pilgrim as a young man from Montpellier, where he was born, to go on pilgrimage to Rome. On the way, he looked after victims of the plague and cured some of them miraculously. He then fell ill of the plague himself and apparently lay alone in the forest, ill near Chen. A dog is supposed to have brought him a little roll of bread every day, which he'd stole from a baronial table somewhere in the nearest town. And there are various versions of what happened. The baron followed the dog and nursed the saint, and he recovered. Anyway, he recovered, went on to perform further miracles, and so on. So in the pictures and statues of St. Roch, you see him not always with a dog, but very often with a dog. And the other thing is that as he was a sufferer from the plague, he has a plague sore on his thigh, which he shows in the later, more refined periods of iconography. The plague sore is all played down, but in the earliest ones, the 15th century, it's sometimes played up and made to be very grisly. Well, my poem then has the idea that the dog went with him from the beginning on his pilgrimage, and the dog takes the credit naturally for his recovery. And I can tell you, if anyone wants to know, after I've read the poem, the basic idea of trying to recreate the consciousness of a dog, the peculiar state of hovering between animal and human feelings or reactions. I am trotting where I should, light, upright in soldierhood. I am his own, so faithful known, so dogly good. My own, his two, his one, and none so true, like son, like father, or if rather brother, not a t'other, but a one. And he is mine, a visage fair, and voice as rare. He is my own, we are not two, so faithful known. I was and were a country cur, had he not me, would never be not mangy, skulking at Tom's Hope, come see, Mud River, just my luck. At best to take off, dancing, here I go, laughing, and so away, hey, answer to names like Long Dick, Ricochet and Chuff, Tell Bill and Willie P, Willie Flea and John DeWitt. Ah, but himself, since he had wished to take, he took in hand, he took in me, my education. Ah, walking, he walk far, he not go back. He, I, we not go back. Where he is, what is, which I am but for, only see and only be, and hear at heel now, hear and smell and see, nor not wonder longer, shorter, or if can, but do what that one man, any one thing he tells me. For this did, merely done, dog only knows that he must take and be taken for a walk, and both to come and both become, to each all his adventures. Saunter and run and roll and yell, go generally mad for his reward, not to be bored. O God, O keep from he that agony. A wise dog, a nice dog, is twice dog. Amicus amorous, the good, brave, generous, and clever dog, bright boy. But oh, you vagabond, you poor old slavey chap, you poor crackpot, addled, classical lost heart, not fast and loose, but deep and douce, but humbly liquefied, drop-eared and sorry-eyed, by foot or lap or knee, not knowing it will never do, he asking fondly for some kind or kin or kindled godliness, some goodly fondleness, unbearably knowing, not knowing that it will not do, be never, not be true. How so we go in grace, silk air and sun of summer, taking and be taken for a walk, my ride, my hop, my read and write, and rumbles, tumbles, turns here to be shrewd, panting importantly, sitting down, hastily to itch, then on to such collating, snufflicating, dating, but all they, everyone, gone said and done. Says he, said that she did, indeed, and was it, and how could, who would, so gabble. But if so, I'll quote and add my note, adds nothing, but to sign the same, turn round and scratch the ground stiffly with hinder claws, mutter and bristle hence that too misguided ghost, fool dog and his impertinence, his mere faded inconsequence. Then the more diligently scrambles, pushes, ambles and rambles by these bushes, brambles and a broken fence, my cobwebs floating whispers more intense at every corner, my tale, my toll of parts, my phantomology, my stump and routine potter in patrol, past time of plenty fluid, yet a play of fighting, biting, my grunting it of flighting with this and that and t'other one, another I, whose name and game too's writ in water. Wherefore, if I at any time sound wanting, sadly wanting, or obtuse, I better had you better did be understand I am no use, no good, and much the more because, or none the less, albeit, not wanting wantonly, but haunted, bitten, hoping some complete change of condition, yet jog on, jog up and go by with my old banner up, gambling easier than hanging in there, gnawed at, though with him, like as he feels also made to be, lost, wanting, perpetually, never out nor in. I know we can have a beginning of the story, or the central part is the story. Rock was his name, and Rock I knows, not driven away by grief or grain or dainty dame, but cast to walk and pray, and so we left for good. Well, have you pleased I been so good, can be of use? To shun society and walk in piety, he carries all, and carries on his back a pilgrim's pack. Was bearded, had eyes that were set wide and well back, and they were all right, oh, they were quite as usual, happily unhappy, and for me I did regularly knees up, and all through were right too, and my love not marred by undogly self-regard. So methoughts I stood or sat, wagged my tail and dreamed of that, if only that. Saw this master under hat with a wooden stick or bat, in his hoping went on way, and I to go along a low eloping, his desire being young, not to stay nor be long, but to find better way, being strong, not to tire nor be sick, not go wrong, not delay. So had the stick and pack, was bearded, had eyes by cheek set wide and back. Still we pace, he and I, by some city, walls high up raised, no remedy, poison leaks from the cracks. Yellow-smelling weed on stone is pretty. Then I see his edge of bed. He looks sitting down, his head forward bent and spread wide his knees. Know what said. Within on thigh, finger, thumb, round it pressed, found that guest. Stinking thing that grows on him, sweating, swelling like an egg, eye sniffing gingerly by leg. Now he lies far away, cast away, on his back, head on pack, in a shed. Dust and dew, thickets few, day by day I did creep to that Lord Baron's board. I was able, beg at table, cut and run, back to shed, followed none, bring him bread. Well then, rock recovers. Well, have you pleased I been so use and good, and can so run, when he sick, dead, and done, and God forsaken, and can so read, and can so run, when stank so naciously, and saw no clear, I only seed, and off I speed, and found and feed him bread. So we here again, not like we fear, and dead man he gone up and take a few steps, 1 and 2 and 3, and far away is near, and blue of mountains, blue by under near the sea, all is sweet, all is clear. And now for an ever we walk in a way and work such wonders. Look, you'll see him stand as for a picture, standing with his hat put off and slung, and wooden dish and bat, and shows the sword high up on his bare thigh, the tunic lifted and held by, grey duffel hanging by his knee, the russet hose undone and down, pulled down to low above the knee. He looks at you, ignoring me, and on the smooth pale skin displays below the groin that visitation, scoloured, spiteful, like a dead snake's head, or rotten ripe a plum bruised, or a nasty jewel, or blind, a broken-lidded eye that leers away confidingly as if it thought back to itself, well, they can see there now, without me. And then the last section shows me the way to praise, to sweeten all one heart. I, not the dog I was, quondam in day agone, but still put on all my old bag of tricks, and up my banner, my leg to spare, my more than 4, my 5, my silk in the air. For now, who is this hound? Why, I could swear the story an old story that happens to be me, and sit and sigh, and then stretch out and snuffle, or give up and lie, but even ever so tired to glorify, and see by dreams we save whole populations. His voice, his face, he opens to their grace, and so forth and amen, and don't you know, because without that, we and it, without to wit all three, he, it, and me, his walk had been no more than mine, but now divine. By me and with his other, light, unguilty, on all fours, quick to opine, not me and mine, but he, the writer. Still I say, silly one, for a son and silly, am a duffer. He so do this, do that, stay here, go on, in good to be, becoming me and him in bright and lasting light. Well, I'm happy to answer any questions. on that. Perhaps we better do that now.
Earlier on you offers the 50 years of writing as something that we ought to be digging into. Where, I mean, when we listen to you, we feel it all comes out as one. But is there, in fact, a conflict between the creative faculties within you and the critical faculties within you? Some of us who try to write find that one gets in the way of the other. How have you come to a balance on that?
Well, I think that one has that problem. I think that one has to be self-critical, and problem for me really for many years, or intermittently, has been feeling that I was never going to write again. I have not been a prolific poet, and at first it was hard to accept that, and it wasn't so much a question of being self-critical, perhaps. No, I think that comes into it, but feeling that you didn't have anything that could make into poetry. Well, I think that for that reason I had to make a new start, it seemed, every now and then. And perhaps a lot of thinking, critical thinking, went into that, into the periods in between writing. I don't think, I think that it's fatal to be uncritical of oneself. I don't think any poet with any achievement is credit has been uncritical of himself. So I'm not quite sure why the problem is really a problem of failure of impulse, or the failure of the creative enthusiasm, or whatever it is, or the emotions which generate poetry. But I gradually had to accept, now this perhaps is a matter of self-analysis and critical thinking, I had to accept that my poetry was intermittent, and that one just had to plug away at trying to find a way forward, or trying to find the next thing to do. And one had to also to put up with a good deal of frustration and failure in that. I mean, the amount of poetry that I've tried to write, failed to write, is really, I couldn't estimate how much. Then I had to gain to realize by critical thinking that that all goes into it somehow in the end. You know, your apparent failures, your apparent schemes that come to nothing or come to little, in the end, probably do come into what you write later. I don't quite know how to tackle this question, because I think that too much critical or analytical work, such as one has to do as a scholar and a teacher, can be sterilize one to some extent. On the other hand, there are benefits in teaching. You read a lot that you might not read if you were not teaching, and you also see new things in the things you're teaching, even if you know them well. I don't see any real incompatibility between being a scholar and a critic, or having a critical mind, and being creative. But I do think what is fatal is drudgery. And a lot of teaching is drudgery, or can be. A lot of administration, of course, is drudgery. So that seemed to me the worst enemy, really. Too much work. But I don't know what word.
Isn't there a sense in which the creative act, the critical act, as well? You know, the rule of revising what you're writing, in fact, being critical of your own work. The critical mind.
I think so, yes, in the end. I think when one becomes with more experience and more practice, you begin to see that when you're writing, you're rejecting all the time. You're rejecting this, that, the other, the within the next line of thought. You're constantly choosing the next rather critical thing.
So did you say they weren't incompatible?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, the creative process itself involves constant critical judgment as you go on from one line to the next almost. As you,
Yeah, that's the way you do it.
I think so.
Yes,
I think
mean,
so.
I wondered if you'd let things come out.
Well, things
for a while.
have to come, but then you're looking at it at the same time. You're looking at it and saying, well, no, that's not quite right, or perhaps you do put it down and then you come back later, much later, revise. But I think there's always a choice going on all the time, and I suppose rather like a computer, which is always going yes, no, yes, no. Don't you think? You know, it can only make that one choice. But when you're writing too, you're making a choice.
The scholar poet is rare in English literature, though, isn't he? You are,
What kind?
Scholar poet is rare in English.
Well, I don't know. You see, this is a romantic idea, but is it true? I mean, that poets were accepted as if you were a poet, you would be a learned man. I mean, Chaucer was learned.
Yes.
Shakespeare, of course, was notoriously not learned, or not supposed to be, but Milton was supremely learned.
Yes.
Pope had his own kind of learning. In fact, down to the Romantic period, it was quite taken for granted that a poet might be widely read and learned in other ways too. And this very often happens, of course, in much less sophisticated literatures than ours. I mean, in countries with the revival of literatures in different countries, for example, in the 19th century, a revival of, say, Catalan as a poetic language or Provençal, this was always done by scholars who also happen to be poets. You know? I'm sure it happens in Eastern European countries or Eastern Oriental countries. You know? You've got this curious romantic idea that poet as a kind of wispy, inspired creature. And is that sort of is that an answer? I mean, we're too limited in our notions now of what poetry, the scope of poetry. I mean, that's natural because learning and science and all those things have moved in so many directions which are no longer available to poetry. I mean, they're too specialized, they're too technical, they're too remote. So learning and culture have moved away from poetry. So it becomes more difficult for the poet to be learned in the sense that he could have been in a more literary culture.
Perhaps to round off this particular discussion, I mean, you said earlier, back home, you were talking about some students in creative writing you've had, and I think it's the girls. The girls in California.
They were in Virginia. They were a very beautiful girls' college called Hollins College.
Well, you said they all had the wrong idea about poetry. You didn't actually say what you thought the right idea was, and in what way they were wrong.
Well, I mean, they were not to be blamed very much. They were complete beginners. And of course, in many American universities, you can do a writing course in poetry or prose or both, and get credit for it. And of course, it is in a sense an easy option because you try it, they try it, and they're not necessarily. Nobody's going to say that they're expected to have talent. They're going to find out what they can do. So to that extent, it's a very blundering sort of amateurish business, and you must expect things. Disappointments or irritations from it. But they're learning something from it. And I think that there are all kinds of wrong paths to chase up wrong things. I mean, trying to make poetry very difficult or very cryptic. So that's why I think I said somewhere earlier, communication is one of the things you have to try to make them aware of communication. But on the whole, of course, again, they've got very little sense, or practically no sense, in most American universities, of a literary tradition. They don't have what we've had here, anyway, for a good many centuries, feeling of a body of literature which is there anyway, is relevant. I don't think that in England we feel that our literature, our poetry is wholly irrelevant to our themselves at the moment, but in the States there's no such feeling of it.
Did you ever feel that you should have gone back to South Africa and created that moral responsibility which only words can give to that very difficult situation in your homeland, original homeland?
Well, I don't think I could have achieved anything. I mean, quite frankly, if I had done so, it would have been a mistake, I think.
But all that's like your self-improvement and counter that.
Well, it was a
It
generation
stayed,
when,
yeah.
I think in that generation, it was more and more understandable people left because nothing was happening in South Africa. Well, Campbell's failure to establish himself there was a symptom that it was really impossible at that moment for white South African public to be interested in literature of any quality. And that was just when I was growing up. So, I mean, I felt in 1930 or thereabouts when I was young that there was nothing there for one to take up. And England, obviously, things were exciting in England. I mean, that period between the wars, the modern movement and...
But I think of Patrick White and how he came here, whatever it was, 30s or something, or wasn't it? About 10 years and wrote another sort of novels, I think, at that time. And then went back as a very solitary figure in a very Philistine country, which also, of course, has its insipid racism in the sense that you don't know anyone in at all, you know, and so on. And how, in fact, it seems to, you know, I mean, I think you, in fact, created major works within the English tradition in England, but...
Well, I don't think I could have done it in South Africa. I mean, if I'd written this kind of thing in South Africa, it would appear to be even less in step, as I said earlier, than it has here. But I don't think I could have done it because it wouldn't have had the same sense that there was a context in which you were writing. I mean, I think it's not quite right to compare Australia with South Africa, because Australia doesn't have such hideous problems, internal problems, social problems. And of course, in both countries, in all Commonwealth countries now, there's a really very different situation. There's far more writing, far more cultural activity than there was 50 years ago.
In fact, what you have,
Since the war.
I think, is in fact, like it was